It's a massive construction on the lawn of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Let's take a look. Here it is. This is nicknamed the Claw because of the steel arches. They're 90 feet tall. They dwarf the president's residence, as you can see. That's about 70 feet tall, and it's made up of camera rigs, the lighting grid, overhead canopy too in case it rains, all being put together for the first professional sports event ever held on the ground. Cage fighting, UFC Freedom Day 250 it's called, June the 14th, coinciding with President Trump's birthday, and it's part of broader celebrations of the 250th year of US independence. President Trump's called it potentially the greatest show on earth. Critics have called it a monstrosity, zero class, tone deaf, overtly political, tied to Trump's birthday. Joe Rogan, interestingly, the sport's most famous commentator, the world's most listened to podcaster, described it as odd. Said he doesn't like it. Let's bring in Sean Gregory, Time Magazine's sports correspondent in New York. Welcome to France 24, Sean. Great to have you with us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's take us back to the root of this story, Sean. Why is it happening?
Well, in 2001, Dana White, the CEO of the UFC, took over the UFC, which was a fringe organization at the time. It was labeled human cockfighting by the late Senator John McCain. Nobody really watched it. It was kind of thought of as a freak show, basically. Dana White takes it over, and his first fight card as president was at the Trump Taj Mahal Casino in Atlantic City. So Trump gave him a chance, took a chance on the UFC when it wasn't popular. And since then, for a variety of reasons, the UFC's popularity has exploded. And Donald Trump and Dana White have become close friends. Dana White introduced Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention in 2024, 5 days after the assassination attempt at him. You know, Donald Trump picked Dana White over his kids, over other family members. So says a lot about their relationship, and thus the White House fight in 2 weeks.
It's probably worth saying, I think I'm right in saying Dana White also introduced President Trump to Joe Rogan. And you know, if we look at the impact Joe Rogan, perhaps we shall never know the exact impact, but that podcast had at 3 hours that he sat there talking, this kind of butterfly effect of not just the UFC, but his presidency.
They both helped each other, right? Trump takes a chance on the UFC in 2001. UFC goes up from there. And during the 2024 campaign, Dana White was very important. That the president's words was very important to his re-election as president in 2024. He connected him with Joe Rogan, and he also connected him with other young male podcasters favored by folks on the right, with huge audiences of folks on the right, young audiences, young male audiences. And he went on a bunch of those type of popular podcasts. And, Trump gives Dana White Dana White credit for helping him win the election. Dana White said if he stays on Fox News, he's speaking to the choir. Everybody watching Fox News already loves President Trump. Young male voters, he did very well with young male voters in 2024. And I think Dana White had a significant role in that.
It's interesting that there is, as you probably would have heard, criticism about this. There's a number of Democrats against it. Senator Adam Schiff saying Trump is building a golden ballroom for his birthday party, arranging a UFC fight on the lawn while Americans, quote, are fighting to pay this month's bills. Could he be more out of touch? We've heard from Representative Jared Huffman, who says Trump is spending your money on a gaudy event. This needs to stop. Joe Rogan's an interesting spectre in all of this. What's your take? Because he's not put himself forward to say this is absolutely synonymous with UFC, but he says, what? He's not keen. What's he saying?
Yeah, no, he said it was odd, as you mentioned before. He's also called it a gimmick. Joe Rogan is part of the fabric of the UFC, and obviously he's hugely influential here in the United States. And he has an independent streak. For years he wouldn't put Donald Trump on his podcast. Wound up endorsing him in 2024. They had that conversation. When I interviewed the president for our cover story about Dana White that came out last week. And I mentioned to the president, Joe Rogan called this a gimmick, and Donald Trump's reaction was basically, oh, really? Well, he's not wrong. Life's a gimmick. It's a good gimmick. That was basically what the president said. So people will make up their minds. I think fight fans are going to love it. Opponents of the president won't. What's interesting is the UFC isn't charging gate revenue. So they're going to lose, they say, about $30 million on this whole spectacle. But they're betting that people will watch out of curiosity and become fight fans after June 14th.
So they're going to lose money because this is a free event and they're expecting big crowds, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, there's 4,300 seats for the fight itself. And then across the street at the Ellipse, I think you can see it in the preview shot, the big public park across the street from the White House. There's going to be a watch party. 85,000 people will be there. There'll be performances. Zach Brown band is playing the night before, music, sponsorship activations, all this stuff, the typical fan fest type things. And that's also free. You have to register. So they're saying that you can't buy a ticket to this to watch the actual fight. So yeah, they are going to lose money, but it's a marketing campaign for them. We're talking about UFC now. There's going to be tons of talk about the UFC, more talk about the UFC in places like Time on networks than you usually get in the 2 weeks before a typical fight.
Now, in Europe, we have some leaders, particularly in the UK right now, and they're getting through them in a rate of knots that say they're very different, those that support them, privately than they are publicly. Keir Starmer, for one, go back a few years, Gordon Brown's another, that famously after he left, people said, we never saw the real Gordon Brown, to the point. You just spent some time last week with President Trump, probably in an area that he's very, very comfortable, by the sound of it, talking about. Is he exactly the same in private? Well, tell me about that experience.
Oh, yeah. He is the same in public and private. I was ushered into the back room of the fight in Miami where he and Dana White were going over plans on a laptop for this White House fight. This was in April where I did the interview with the president and Dana White. And I felt like I was talking to somebody who I've seen, been part of my life for the last 8+ years. I mean, longer than that, but particularly in the political end, 8+ years. So to me, I asked him a question about why he was doing this. Why, of all the things you can do on the White House lawn, you picked UFC? And his basic answer was, I like it. And that was it. And then he started talking about how many counties he won in the 2024 election. So he's, to me, in my brief time with him, I felt, it was a little bit, you got to be naturally nervous when you're interviewing the president of the United States, whoever he or she is. But I felt like it was a familiar character. So it was somewhat surreal, but also kind of somewhat natural because he's a fight fan. I'm doing a fight story. And so you of course, you're going to talk to this person who happens to be the president of the United States.
Some analysis suggests President Trump is reveling in the controversy of it. This is a legacy moment for him that when historians look back, as they are now, at the pomp and the festivities at the 200th year, to kind of compare and contrast, that for 250, the Trump year will stand out.
Yeah, I mean, this is fighting, cage fighting. It gets to his ethos, right? Of not caring what people, not playing by the rules. There are some rules in the UFC, but MMA, mixed martial art, the sport that the UFC promotes, is violent. You can wrestle somebody to the ground and start punching him in the head. Like, he's played rough and tumble politics. So it melds a sport that he has long been an admirer of, no doubt. It melds his ethos, and it's a big moment. It's what he wants to do, and he loves going to these fights because when he goes to these fights, he's mostly applauded. He has this tradition. He's been to 3 fights. Well, 3 fights as president this time around, and 1 as president-elect. And he does this walkout with Dana White, and the crowd goes nuts. So. When I met him in April, the Iran negotiations were going on with J.D. Vance in Islamabad. They had just kind of broken down while he was watching this fight. And, people criticized him, like, shouldn't you be, dealing with Iran? He didn't go to his own son's wedding because of what's going on in Iran, but he went to a UFC fight because he loves the adulation there. He loves the sport. And I think there's the element of walking out with Dana White and being applauded. It's like a Trump rally in a way.
You say it's brutal. There could be blood on the lawn. It's the first sport that's been taken place on the White House lawn. It's only been a sport, since the early 2000s. There was a fight to turn it into a sport. But there's also a misconception, isn't there? There are rules with cage fighting. There's kind of within a sporting environment. Yes, it's brutal, but there are certain things you can't do.
Of course, for sure. You can't kick in the groin, poke people's eyes out. There are all kinds of rules. And when it first started it was actually started in the mid '90s, and then Dana White and his partner bought it in the early 2000s. And during those first 5 years or so, there weren't really any rules, and cable companies refused to carry it because it was too violent. Now, yeah, there are rounds, there are referees. You can't do, again, two things are poking people's eyes out, kind of just crazy, no holds barred, choking and things like that. But you can, there will be blood on the mat. Like whenever you see a UFC card, the next fight comes out, there's blood on the mat. So you're going to see some rough stuff. But for sure, it's a sanctioned, organized event. You got to give Dana White credit for taking this sport, MMA, and organizing it in a way where there are titles and there are fight cards, there are different weight classes. He's really done a good job of staging these events all over the world. And now, I mentioned that cable wouldn't carry it in the early 2000s. Now Paramount Plus, Paramount, the multimedia global company worldwide, paid $7 billion for the rights.
Wow.
To broadcast UFC fights. They did that last year. And UFC now on Paramount Plus starting in 2026.
Wow. So it's worth about 1.5 billion, isn't it? Like you say, this growing. And there's a thread, there's a track that's very similar between Dana White and Trump as well. Both kind of did reality television, not just The Apprentice, but for Dana White, remember The Ultimate Fighter from those early 2000s as well, made stars of people like Michael Bisping from the UK. There could be a French interim heavyweight champion as well on the night.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and I give Dana White credit. He was purposely international in this card. He's got a fighter from France, a fighter from Brazil. He got a little bit of flack for not having any women's fighters on the card. His argument is there's a fighter in China who they really wanted to fight an American for a title, and he wanted a fighter from China to, again, just expand the international reach. The symbolism of having a Chinese fighter on the White House lawn. He was intrigued by the geopolitics of that. Unfortunately, he says that the fighter from China that he wanted to have on the card has temporarily retired from the game.
Sean, brief yes or no. Will you be there on the night?
Oh man, I really. The problem is I'm having a very reportedly. I'm sorry. I know you said brief yes or no. Perhaps we're covering the World Cup. And the World Cup is 2 nights before, so I'm trying to figure out the logistics. So a little bit of maybe. Yes.
Well, either way, hopefully around the time we speak to you again. Great to talk to you, Sean, tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Sean Gregory, Time Magazine sports correspondent in New York. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.